Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sachs, and we're going on a journey together. Welcome to the Marco Polo Drive of Peace, Culture, and Sustainable Development. We're going to have a wonderful trip through Eurasia, from Europe to Asia, over the coming weeks. And we're going to be seeing a lot and learning a lot along the way. So I'm absolutely delighted that you are joining the course, and I'm excited to be driving with you across this vast landmass in which so much history has been made. I'm standing on the bridge of San Angelo, one of the iconic spots of the whole world. To my back is Castle San Angelo, also known as Hadrian's mausoleum or Hadrian's tomb. Hadrian, of course, was one of the emperors of the Roman Empire. He was an emperor during the years 117 AD to 138 AD. So he takes us back almost 2,000 years, and this was the great mausoleum that he built. He was a great emperor because Rome had reached its maximum extent, and Hadrian said, we don't have to fight wars anymore. We'll protect our borders. We will solidify our empire. We will enjoy our wealth. And we will trade with China. This is very important because looking back roughly 1,900 years, there was already globalization. Don't think that's a new phenomenon. Globalization has been with us as long as we have been human beings. We have been moving across vast distances, and we have been trading and exchanging ideas across vast distances as well. Well, to go back to Hadrian, around 120 AD, at the time of the Roman Empire's great expanse, there was also the great empire of China, the Han Dynasty. And already then, 1,900 years ago, the ladies of Rome loved the silks coming from the Han Empire. And so what later became known in the 19th century as the Silk Roads were already the trade routes connecting East and West, basically 2 millennia ago. That's the journey that we're going to be taking together. We're going to be exploring that great Silk Route, which is really multiple roads and networks that interconnect Europe and Asia, and that have done so for 2,000 years. We're going to be tracing in part the journey of one great traveler that you've heard of and you'll hear a lot about along the way, and that is, of course, Marco Polo. His story is a legendary and true story of journeying from Italy, where we start our course and where we start our journey together, to China. He did so quite a few years ago. I'm very tickled by the fact that Marco Polo was born exactly 700 years before me. He was born in 1254 AD. I was born in 1954. I feel a certain kinship with Marco Polo, and I feel extremely lucky that we're going to be following his route. What are we going to be doing on this journey? We're going to be exploring east-west trade. We're going to be exploring the Silk routes. We're going to be exploring the most important concept for our time, and that is peace. Peace that extends across Europe and Asia, peace that extends around the world. We need this so much because when there is peace, as there has been at critical times in history, there has been exuberance, there has been prosperity, there has been trade, there has been interconnectedness. And so this journey is a journey of peace. It's a journey of culture, to examine close up the hugely diverse and wondrous cultures of Europe and Asia, And we'll be seeing along the way how they meld together from our starting point in Rome today to our final destination in Shenzhen and Hong Kong a few weeks from now. And our third aspect of the journey is sustainable development. Sustainable development is a concept we will be meeting again and again along our route. Sustainable development means a world that is prosperous, a world that is socially just, a world that is environmentally sustainable, and a world that is at peace. And our goal of this journey is to help us understand how we can make a world that is peaceful, in which we enjoy the diverse cultures of the world, and in which we achieve the aims of sustainable development. That is the great adventure that we will be on together, and it will be the great learning that we will be engaged in. Now, we're going to be visiting wondrous, iconic sites. As I stand here on the Ponte San Angelo, on the San Angelo Bridge, I'm in one of the most remarkable places of all of history. I have the Tiber River on both sides, which is the great river that passes through Italy and on which the capital city of Rome was established more than 2,000 years ago. And this was a city already at the time of Hadrian of 1 million people, the largest city in the world at the time, and the eternal city today, because we look at Rome and how it has survived and how it has transformed for millennia, and we bask in its history and its beauty and what we can learn about our own world from looking at the past. So here we are on the Tiber, on the bridge of San Angelo, in front of Hadrian's tomb. But why San Angelo? Because if you look up at the top, you may see the archangel Michael, the archangel, the saint who came to save the city of Rome. Now, that's how this mausoleum also came to be called the Castel San Angelo. Why this other name? Why not just the tomb of Hadrian? Because at the end of the 6th century, Rome was experiencing a pandemic. Not COVID, but plague. And this plague was devastating the city. And the Pope at the time, Gregory the Great, had a vision that the archangel would come to save the city of Rome. And he had a vision that the archangel appeared at the top of the mausoleum. And that's where this great sculpture now represents this vision of the Pope in the year 590. And from that time, this place has been called the Castel San Angelo. It's a historic site for so many reasons, because in the eternal city, everything gets repurposed. So it was a mausoleum. It has been a storehouse, but then it became a fortress. Interestingly, in the year 1527, Rome was sacked by the soldiers of the Holy Roman Empire, who were not being paid. They were due past wages. And so they went on a rampage. And the Pope at the time, Clement VII, had to run from where we're going to see in a moment the Vatican. He had to run across the bridge into the fortress to save his life. And so this became a protection site for the Pope. This has been playing a role in history from already 2,000 years. Now, we're going to start our journey today in Rome, and I want to tell you a little bit about Marco Polo and his family in just a few minutes, but I want to tell you a little bit about the journey that we're going to be taking. We're going to be driving sustainably in electric vehicles from the Vatican, from the heart of Rome and the heart of the Roman Catholic Church, this wondrous site that we'll visit in just a moment. We're going to be driving from the Piazza San Pietro, St. Peter's Square, all the way to Shenzhen and to Hong Kong. And that journey of thousands of kilometers is going to take us across the ancient Silk routes. And along the way, every week, we will be together so that we can explore the history, the culture, and the challenges of sustainable development. The next week, after our start in Rome, we'll be meeting in Belgrade. Belgrade was the western terminus of the Silk Route. So all of the spices and the silks and the other precious goods that would come across from Asia would come to Belgrade and other cities nearby, and then come to merchants and to be distributed and traded across the rest of Europe. When we are in Belgrade, we'll be at another historic site, and at that point, we'll discuss in detail the Silk Road, its place in history. From Belgrade, the third week, we will be going to Constantinople. Now, of course, it's known from 100 years now as Istanbul, as part of modern-day Turkey. But it has been known as Constantinople for 1,700 years, because it's 1,700 years ago that another emperor, Emperor Constantine, whom we will meet and get to know a bit, already established Constantinople just at the borders between Europe and Asia, at the Strait of Bosporus. And it's one of the most amazing places in the whole world, as you can imagine, a place that is literally the meeting point of Europe and Asia. We will bask in Constantinople the third week, where we will be discussing the 2,000-year history of that amazing, amazing place. From Constantinople, in the fourth week, we will be going to Baku, another ancient city, now in modern Azerbaijan. And in Baku, we will be at one of the outer reaches of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire will loom large in our story because Marco Polo and his father and uncle traveled during the great age of the Mongol Empire. Indeed, they traveled to meet the great Khan, the great leader of the Mongols. And so during the time in Baku, one of the ancient cities of the Mongol Empire, we will discuss at length the meaning of the largest land-based empire in the history of the world, an empire that goes back to the 13th century, and we're going to meet the great characters of that empire, especially Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, and Kublai Khan, his grandson, who became the great Khan for this mighty empire, the largest that ever was created. From Baku, we continue east, and we continue driving into the steppe lands of Central Asia. The steppes are the great grasslands that stretch thousands of kilometers from east to west. And because they are the great grasslands, the horses love them. These are the native sites of the horses of our world. And it is in these horse-based civilizations, including the Mongol Empire, that some of the greatest culture and civilizations in history took form. So from Baku, we will go to one of the key sites in the steppes of Eurasia, in the grasslands of Eurasia, right at the heart of the Silk Route, and that is Samarkand. You'll see, I promise, why that is one of my favorite places in the whole world. You will be impressed. I can't wait to be there on this journey because it's absolutely amazing. We're going to meet characters that you may not have met before, but one, for example, Ulrich Beck, one of the greatest scientists in history, and one who can inspire us till today. From Samarkand, we will continue our journey east along the Silk routes, and we will get to one of the famed Buddhist sites of the Silk routes in Dunhuang, China. Again, you'll be astounded at what we find in a site that is at least 1,500 years old, where Buddhist monks and traders have been coming for ages and have left remarkable art and relics and history that we will savor. In the 7th week, we will go to the heart of China, Suzhou, and we will see modern China, a China that is at the cutting edge of world technology, a China that has innovation clusters throughout modern China that are helping the entire world to make the transformation to sustainable energy systems and sustainable development more generally. So we have 7 glorious weeks of history, of culture, of East-West exchange, and of time together. In addition to these 7 lectures, we're going to be online together, live, on several occasions. You can ask questions and make comments. We'll have a discussion with a worldwide group joining this tour. So I am absolutely thrilled that we're starting. And let's take a walk, because I want to walk to the Vatican so that we can see really the origin of Marco Polo's journey. Now we're at the right place to start our journey. This is amazing. Of course, we're standing in front of the St. Peter's Basilica. We're standing in front of the Pope's home. We're standing in front of one of the most beautiful sites in the world, but also for our journey, the true starting point, because the Pope of the day of Marco Polo plays an essential role in our journey. And in fact, it is the relationship of the Pope and Kublai Khan, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire, that helps us to understand precisely the voyage of Marco Polo. Well, where are we exactly? We are on Vatican Hill, one of the hills of Rome. And we are in a place where around 1,950 years ago, Emperor Nero had a circus, meaning a circuit for racing and for sports. And this place became a site of one of the most important events of human history. And that is the place where Nero ordered the crucifixion of St. Peter. St. Peter, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, had been entrusted with founding the church that today is the Church of Christianity, and especially the Catholic Church. And Peter came to Rome, and during the persecutions of Emperor Nero after the Great Fire of Rome, Peter and another of the apostles, Paul, both were killed in the persecutions that Nero ordered after the fires, to find those to whom to blame for the fires of Rome. So this is the site in which Peter was crucified, by tradition of Christianity, crucified upside down, because he said he could not share the same crucifixion as his Lord Jesus Christ. So he asked to be crucified upside down. This became, therefore, the venerated site of Christianity. And when Emperor Constantine, as I promised you, the founder of Constantinople, an emperor that we will be meeting repeatedly in our voyage, came to power. He ordered the construction of a church on the site of Peter's crucifixion. And that became the old St. Peter's Church. They say it's the old St. Peter's Church because it lasted for about 1,200 years, from around 325 to around 1525. It was at the beginning of the 16th century with Pope Julius II that the Pope decided that Christianity in its glory needed a new basilica, a new St. Peter's. And of course, we're standing in front of the new St. Peter's. The new St. Peter's was constructed over a period of around 120 years, roughly from 1506, when the construction began, to 1626, when the new St. Peter's was commemorated. So we're at the 400th anniversary exactly of the new St. Peter's as we stand here today. Now, this is the heart of Christendom and of the Catholic Church, but why is it at the heart of the story of Marco Polo and of our journey? Well, that we have to go back to the beginning. And as I said, the beginning is 700 years to the year before my own birth, to the year 1254, when Marco Polo was born to a merchant family in Venice. But when he was born, his father, Niccolo, was already off on his merchant voyage. His father, Niccolo, and his uncle, Maffeo, were doing what they did as leading merchants of Venice, a great trading city of the 13th century that was engaged in east-west trade. They were out to the various trading points of this great east-west trade route, but they did not expect to go further east than they normally would, maybe to Constantinople, maybe to Crimea. But to go further east would be very, very unusual. They were Venetian merchants, after all. Well, they left Marco Polo's mother, who ended up dying just a few years later, probably in childbirth with another child, and left before Marco Polo himself was born in the year 1254. The father and the uncle, Niccolo and Maffeo, went to points to the east. They ended up going to Crimea. They found that there were skirmishes taking place between the rising Mongol Empire, Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire at the time. There were internal fights within Mongol groups. And so they found themselves pushed eastward because they could not safely return westward. They didn't expect to keep going east, but soon enough they found themselves not in Crimea, but all the way in Bukhara, in today's Uzbekistan, which we will be visiting along our route. And then in Bukhara, there they made contact with some of the emissaries of the great Khan, the great king, Kublai Khan. And they were invited as very respectable merchants and very successful and obviously intrepid and brave merchants to continue eastward, something unheard of in the 13th century, but to travel all the way east to the capital of the great Khan. Where was that capital? Well, then it was called Khan Balik. In Chinese, it's called Daidu. For us today, it's called Beijing. Beijing was the winter palace, the winter capital of the Mongols, established by Kublai Khan for his new dynasty that he was creating. And he would proclaim a few years after meeting with the Polos, the Yuan dynasty, which became the great Mongol dynasty that ruled over China for roughly 1 century. Well, here were these two merchants from Venice, and Kublai Khan was a remarkable individual, presiding over the largest land empire in the history of the world, after all, and he was extremely curious. And so he pressed the Polos for information. What is the Christian world like? What is the Pope like? What is happening in your part of the world? And he was very impressed with the answers. He highly respected Niccolo and Maffeo Polo, and he sent them with safe passage all the way back, asking them to make contact with the Pope. Aha, why we are here. Because Kublai Khan, the great Mongol emperor, the great Han, the ruler of China, the ruler of the great landmass, wanted to learn about Christendom. And so he asked the Polo brothers, go home and ask the Pope to send 100 wise men to my court. And if they can convince us and convert us, we will convert to Christianity. And he also asked them for another favor. Bring us some oil from the holy lamp of the Holy Sepulchre Church, where Jesus was crucified and buried in the Christian tradition. Bring us some oil from the lamp, because Kublai Khan heard that this would bring good fortune for his empire. So Niccolo and Maffeo made their way back after this unprecedented journey, and they arrived back in 1269. And they made two discoveries. One discovery was there was no Pope. The Pope had died in 1268. Clement IV had died, and the cardinals had not yet chosen a successor Pope. They discovered something else. There was a boy. Niccolo was a father, and he was the father of a young boy, then aged 15, Marco Polo. And when they decided that they would now follow through on Kublai Khan's requests and have an emissary sent from the church, this time they decided that they would take young Marco with them. In 1271, still no Pope had been chosen. 3 years, the longest gap in church's history. At that point, the cardinals could not decide. But the Polos thought we had better move. Kublai Khan is waiting for us. We had better start our journey eastward again. And so Niccolo and Maffeo and young Marco, 17 years old, made their way to Acre, a Christian city, today's Akko, on the Mediterranean in modern-day Israel. And there they met an emissary of the Pope, a papal legate, whose name was Teobaldo Visconti. And they said, we can't wait any longer. When is there going to be a Pope? And Visconti said, we don't know when there's going to be a Pope, but I give you my blessing, and I give you my instructions that you have made contact with the papal legate and to return to see Kublai Khan. So off they went, no Pope. A few days later, messengers rushed up to them. A Pope had been selected. Who was the Pope? Teobaldo Visconti, the very emissary that they had been sent off with. They rushed back to Acre. And now the new Pope, Gregory X, the name that he had assumed, gave them the formal papal instructions and permissions to go travel back to meet Kublai Khan. Well, Gregory X didn't have 100 learned men that he could devote to this travel, but he did send two learned friars, along with Niccolo, Maffeo, and Marco. And they made some distance going eastward. Then there was a skirmish. There was some fighting ahead. The friars said, "We're out of here." And they fled. So even though the Pope had sent these two Christian brothers to meet Kublai Khan, they scurried away. But Niccolo, Maffeo, and young Marco decided that they would continue the journey. It took them 3 years. Their route is not exactly the route we're going to follow, but there are parts that are the same. They made their way to another site very well known in our day, Hormuz. We know about the Strait of Hormuz now because of the fighting that has taken place in the Persian Gulf. They went to Hormuz to get a ship that could sail to China. But when they looked at the ships, they said, "We don't like the looks of this. These look a little bit dangerous. Maybe we'll proceed overland." And by that time, when they were traveling, now remember this is 1271, the Mongol Empire was now in control of the vast expanse of Eurasia. And the Mongol Empire established something very important, Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, meaning that they policed this vast terrain, this vast, massive land area, so that it was safe to travel across Eurasia. And that's the route that Marco took with his father and his uncle. According to Marco's recounting, it took about 3 years to reach Kublai Khan. They got to know Kublai Khan's summer capital, Xanadu, and the winter capital, as I said, Daidu in China, or Hanbalik, or today's Beijing. And they reached Kublai Khan himself, who was delighted to see them and was eager for news and was eager for the oil from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which they had succeeded in bringing all the way to Kublai Khan. But what is so fascinating is that when Kublai Khan met Marco, he was very impressed with this young man. Marco was gifted in language. He was speaking Chinese. He was able to pick up other languages. And Kublai Khan said, "You will help me." And so young Marco Polo became an emissary for Kublai Khan on journeys across Asia. Marco Polo was sent to India. Marco Polo went to Vietnam. Marco Polo went to the islands that are now Indonesia on long excursions. And then he would come back and he would recount in detail, with vivid memory and with precision, what he had seen. Kublai Khan was delighted. Well, he was so delighted that the Polos were asked, "Stay with me, don't leave," year after year after year. And they stayed through the 1270s, through the 1280s, into the 1290s. They stayed, in fact, for 19 years. And in 1295, the Polos wanted to go home. They had been almost 20 years with Kublai Khan, and Kublai Khan was sending a young princess, Princess Kokoshin, to Persia to meet her betrothed. And he asked the Polos to accompany this princess on her way to Persia. This time, the Polos traveled by ship, by the giant, magnificent vessels that Kublai Khan and his empire had by then developed. And indeed, the Mongol Empire, though we know it as a land empire, would become also a great sea empire, and that would continue into China's next dynasty, the Ming Dynasty into the 14th and the 15th centuries as the great ocean navigation kingdom. Well, they went back, they reached Hormuz, then they went overland, and they made their way back to Venice. And they told the Venetians their stories, and people could not believe. You went all the way, you served Kublai Khan. This was absolutely amazing. But they were held in esteem, and Marco Polo was obviously a very impressive adult with this grand experience of having served for nearly 20 years as the emissary of Kublai Khan. Well, Venice was one of the great trading empires. Its rival in Italy was Genoa. And Genoa and Venice were competing for control over the trade routes, and they were fighting naturally. So in 1298, 3 years after Marco Polo and his father and uncle returned to Venice, there was a war between Venice and Genoa. And Marco Polo, being a prosperous merchant, very well respected in Venice, raised funds for a naval vessel and went out to fight the Genoese. Well, being Marco Polo, he always had an adventurous life. This time, his ship was defeated in battle by the Genoese, and Marco Polo was taken prisoner. Prison is a little bit harsh. He was put under a kind of house arrest in a palace in Genoa, and he spent a year there. And one of the people that he met was a Rustichello of Pisa, also being held prisoner. Now, Rustichello was a very interesting gentleman because he was a novelist. He was a romance writer of the great age of chivalry of the court of King Arthur and other romantic tales. And when he met Marco Polo, Rustichello said, I have an idea how we can spend some time and how we can get a bestseller out of this. Why don't you tell me your story? And that is how one of the most important books of all of history, The Voyages of Marco Polo, came to be written. Marco Polo dictated his accounts of his voyages for Kublai Khan and of his travels to Kublai Khan with his father and uncle to Rustichello, who wrote up this amazing account. A few years later, I think it's the year 1307, the book is published. And let's just say it goes to the top of the bestseller list of the ages, because Kublai Khan becomes this phenomenal image, and Xanadu and the great Mongol Empire becomes a startling, almost dream world for Europe. And Marco Polo has introduced Asia, and especially the Mongol Empire, to the Europeans, opening their eyes, expanding their vision, and creating a yearning for voyage and exploration and travel, the same yearning that all of us are on right now. I'll tell you just one more little interesting anecdote about the voyages of Marco Polo, written with Rustichello. In 1492, another very interesting gentleman, known to us as Christopher Columbus, carried an annotated book of the voyages of Marco Polo with him. Because remember, Christopher Columbus was sure he was going to Asia, and he carried Marco Polo's voyages with him so he would understand what it is that he saw. Of course, that's another story for us, because he made a discovery of the Europeans, of the Americas, He didn't discover the Americas. There were millions and millions of Americans, thank you, the Native Americans that were living there. But he made contact of Europe and the Americas, but carrying the voyages of Marco Polo with him. So this is the story, the journey that is the eye-opening journey of West and East joining together and being made vivid by this wonderful, observant, thoughtful Marco Polo, who helped Europe to see the rest of the world. Now all of us together are going on that journey together. I'm excited for us to be together. Next stop in Belgrade.